Hello and welcome to the first lesson of the course Reading and Writing the Arabic Script, brought to you by www.arabic-studio.com. In this lesson we're going to be going through the first chapter of the textbook by the same name, Reading and Writing the Arabic Script, also available to download for free at that website. So this is divided into 5 parts, this lesson. Part 1, we'll be looking at the primary letters of the Arabic alphabet, 28 letters. Part 2, we'll just go back and look at similar sounding letters and make sure we know how to pronounce them and understand the difference in pronunciation between similar sounding letters. Part 3, we'll look at, Part 3 I'll recite the whole alphabet and hopefully you can recite along from beginning to end. Part 4, we're going to look at supplementary letters, which are letters in Arabic which aren't part of the standard alphabet, but they're used in Arabic anyway. And in Part 5, we'll just have a few revision suggestions before next lesson. So there are 28 letters in the Arabic alphabet. I'm just going to go through each letter one at a time and understand how to pronounce it correctly. Now I should give you a word of warning here. In order to understand the correct way to pronounce these letters, I'm going to be using English equivalents, and sometimes there are equivalents in some dialects of English which don't exist in others, so I'll be making use of the different dialects of English and also French where appropriate, and as you'll see, my understanding and pronunciation and impersonation of those dialects is very imperfect, but hopefully bear with me and it will give you an idea of how to pronounce the letters correctly. So beginning then with the alif, this is a slightly awkward letter to begin with, and so I'm just going to leave it out and come back to it in section 4, and you'll see why we do that then. So really we're beginning with the letter ba. Now this is equivalent to our English letter B, okay, as in book, for example. So if we were to write the word book using Arabic letters, we begin with ba, okay? Then we have da. Now this is the equivalent of our English letter T, as in table, for example. There's just a couple of points to note here before we move on. Firstly, you will have noticed, if you're familiar with Urdu, that the names of the letters are slightly different to the names of the letters in Urdu. So for example, whereas in Urdu we have B, in Arabic we have ba, and whereas in Urdu we have de, in Arabic we have da. And also, as one of the reasons for this difference in the names of the letters is that they're actually pronounced slightly differently as well. So it is something to listen out for and trying to get right. So in Urdu, the ta, for example, which is de in Urdu, is a much softer sound and slightly further from our English T. So if we take a word like tawrah, for example, or takabbur, which means pride and arrogance in Arabic, this word is also used in Urdu, but with a softer ta, so it becomes with a te, takabbur, okay? The second point to note here is that there are fewer letters in the Urdu alphabet compared to the Arabic alphabet. So we don't have, for example, pe in Arabic, whereas we do in Urdu, which is the English P sound. So that's something to bear in mind. Okay, then we have tha. Now this is, in English, represented by the combination th in words like thin and thick. Alright. Then we have Jim. This is just the equivalent of the English J, as in Jack and Jim, for example. One thing to bear in mind and to try and get right is that this sound isn't like the zh sound, which is sometimes heard in English in words like vision, for example, and which is also heard in French in words like je m'appelle, or phrases like je m'appelle. So it is a hard sound, Jim, for Jack and Jim. Alright. Then we have ha. Now this is approximately our English H, but not quite. The way to pronounce this is that it is by a constriction of the throat. So the muscles that we use for swallowing, they actually tense up, and it makes the throat constrict slightly, which results in the air rushing out much quicker than it ordinarily does for H. So what we get is a ha sound, a ha, and it's sometimes heard in some English exclamations. For example, aha. If you were to say aha, you would sort of hear this sound. And also, for example, if you were to shout hey, all right, you might make this sort of an H sound. So it's not the equivalent of our English H as in hello or hi. It's a much sharper sound with the throat constricting and the air rushing out much quicker. Ha. Okay. Then we have ha. This is the equivalent of the CH in the Scottish dialect. So for example, where they say loch, that ch sound is this ha. Okay, then we have dal, which is very easy, so English D, words like dad. Then dhal. which is represented in English by a th, in the combination th in words like this and that. Now, if you've been paying attention, hopefully, you will have noticed that we already had a th earlier on when we were discussing the letter th. And the reason is, the reason that both letters are represented by th is that the th combination actually produces two different sounds in English. So if you listen carefully, you'll hear that there's a clear difference between the th in thin and the th in this. This. We don't say this, do we? We say this. So that difference in phonetics is called voiced and voiceless. So the thin is voiceless, and the th in this is called voiced. And we'll come back to this in the next section. But that difference in Arabic translates into two separate letters. So the th of thin is that, and the th of this and that is idhal. Okay, then we have the ra. The ra. Now this isn't like the English r, and that's the way this letter is used, usually used in Urdu, but that's not the way it's used in Arabic. Okay, the way to think about this letter, and the way to get it right, is to roll your tongue so you get a r sound. Now what's happening when you're making that sound is that the tongue is making a series of quick flaps against the upper front part of the mouth, which is known as the alveolar ridge. Now if you imagine isolating a single one of those flaps, so ra, ra, that's the ra sound. And it is used in certain English dialects. So for example, in American English, it's sometimes used as where we have the letter T. So where in British English we would say better and use the T as a standard T, in American English you might hear better, rar. So that you can hear that flap that's being made with the tongue and the alveolar ridge. That's the ra sound. And again, also in Australian English, you might hear berah, berah. So it's the same sound. It's that flap that's being made, and that's the ra sound. Okay, then we have a few very easy letters. So we have zai, which is the English z, words like zebra. We have sin, which is the English s. The equivalent is the English s, words like sun. Sheen, which is the English equivalent is sh, in words like shatter, for example. And then we have a slightly difficult to get right series of letters called the emphatic consonants, and they are sad, dad, ta, and dha. Alright, so these are known as the emphatic consonants, and also sometimes referred to as the velarized or the pharyngealized consonants. And the way to think of them is that, with the exception of the dad, which we'll come to later, the second letter in the series, each of these is a heavier or a emphatic version of one of the letters which has preceded, of another letter which has preceded it. And the way that emphasis is produced is that the front of the tongue, or the part of the tongue which is making some contact with the mouth, is usually some part of the front of the tongue, is making that contact with some pressure. And the back of the tongue is raised, and what it results in is a heavier or a deeper sort of sound. So let's just give a few examples. So if we have the first letter in this series, the sad, okay, now this is the emphatic version of sin. Okay, the emphatic version of sin. So whereas sin is quite light, we have sad, which is heavier, and the way that heaviness is produced is that the front of the tongue is in contact with the same point of the mouth in both sin and sad, but for the sad that contact is harder, and also the back of the tongue is raised. So sin and sad, sin and sad. Dad, like we said, we're going to come back to. So ta, the ta is the emphatic da. Okay, so the same principle applies. The front of the tongue makes contact with the same point in the mouth in both letters, da and ta, but in ta, that contact is much harder, and the back of the tongue is raised. So we have da and ta. Just to give you a few examples, if you go back to look at sin and sad, for example, we have the verb in Arabic, sebba, which means to curse someone or to swear at someone, which begins with sin, sebba. But then we have sabba, which begins with sad, as you can hear, it's a heavier sound, which means to pour water. Here, with da and ta, we have, for example, takabbur, which we had earlier, which means pride or arrogance. Whereas with ta, we have tib, for example, which means medicine. You can hear there's very different sounds. Okay, then we have the dha. The dha. Now this is the emphatic version of the dhal sound. Same principle. So the dhal, the tongue is in the same, making contact with the same point of the mouth, which is in fact just